What is up, guys? This is the Gambler, and today I'm talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Obviously, this is the third part and final part of James Gunn's Guardians trilogy within the MCU, and I have to say that for a third film, I really quite love this movie. I actually loved it more than I thought I would, as I like the Guardians of the Galaxies, but they're not really some of my favorite characters in the MCU. I thought the first film was really good, and I think it is probably the funniest MCU movie. The second one was a bit of a step down. I think they did overdose on the comedy and a lot of it fell flat in my opinion. I also had some issues with some of the Guardians members, in particular Star-Lord and Drax in the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame films. I felt that Star-Lord had this great character development in the first Guardians film, and then in the second one going into the Avengers movies, I felt like he kind of regressed as a character and went back to being childlike. And to a lesser extent, I felt that way about Drax as well. Although I can say with confidence that whatever issues I had with certain characters in the team, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 addresses a lot of those concerns in a positive way, and I walked out really happy with how the movie turned out. Just to go over many of my positives, one thing I noticed that this movie does well that we haven't seen in a lot of the recent MCU movies is that the visual effects actually look incredible. In Phase 4 and Phase 5, there's really only one movie where I thought the visual effects looked really good, and that was Spider-Man No Way Home. Other than that, it's been shaky in parts or most of a lot of Phase 4 and Phase 5. Before watching this movie, I read somewhere online that James Gunn was actually going to use the volume stage that was used on The Mandalorian, and last minute they decided to use practical sets as he did with his work on the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, and I think that was a brilliant decision because the practical sets really show in a good way. For example, I never noticed how big the Guardians of the Galaxy ship was, and I mean from the interior, until I saw this movie. But even putting that aside, even scenes that relied heavily on CGI, the CGI was really well done and well blended with the practical parts of the scene. Now, I saw this movie on an IMAX screen, and I could say that this movie looked amazing. It kind of gave me the same vibes I had of watching Rogue One on IMAX. And you know I loved Rogue One, especially the visuals I think are incredible and some of the best visuals of any movie, to be honest. Unlike Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, that did rely a lot on the volume and a lot of green screen, and the CGI did not look as good as it does in this movie, I felt really like the characters were actually in outer space. What I mean by that is, I felt so into the movie, and whenever they would visit these weird worlds and planets, I really felt like I was in a very foreign place. Whereas in Ant-Man, it always felt like actors that were just on a soundstage. It never felt like I was really in the quantum realm, if you know what I mean. It goes without saying that the highlight of this movie is definitely Rocket Raccoon. The backstory of Rocket Raccoon is just so heartbreaking. They do a really good job of getting you emotionally connected to him. You know, some people may cry at his tragic backstory. I felt bad for him, but then I was happy for him because I think he does find happiness, and in my opinion, his story ends on a good note. And I'll just leave that at that. Like I said earlier, I didn't like how Star-Lord kind of regressed into being more immature in the previous films of Avengers and Guardians 2. But I did like that in this movie, he was toned down a bit. He still had his comedic moments, but they did land in this movie a lot more than they did in Guardians 2. I would say the same thing about Drax. He was toned down, but I don't know if he was toned down. I think he was just better written in this movie than he was in Guardians 2, because he had the biggest laughs in my screening of this movie. And his character arc was very well done, so hats off to Gunn for that. Same can be said about pretty much all of the Guardians, except for Groot. Groot is kind of the same guy, but everyone else had a logical, consistent end to their character arcs that made sense and felt good. I also would like to add that the camera work was quite creative and fun in this movie, and a lot less bland than what you see in the movies such as Quantumania. Now, I don't mean on shitting on Quantumania, I actually did like the movie, but it does sort of encapsulate a lot of the issues that Marvel's been having post Endgame with their movies and TV shows. But anyway, the camera work, there's a particular scene in this movie. It's an action scene near the end of the movie, and if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. That was very, very cool. Very, very well done. Okay, now I'm gonna get to the cons, and I don't really have a lot of them. They're mostly nitpicks, but I gotta say the cons, right, for a movie review, because this isn't the greatest comic book movie of all time. There are some things that stood out to me. I thought that the High Evolutionary was okay as a villain. He served his purpose well in this movie. I sort of understood his reasonings for why he did what he was doing, but I felt like the movie needed a bit more. Now, I'm not asking for the movie to add an extra 10 minutes or anything. I just mean that in the scenes where he was monologuing and whatnot, I kind of wish that he had a bit more depth in his motivations. Other than that, the only other cons I have really are just minor nitpicks, such as I think some of the villains were beaten a little too easily and did not pose as much of a threat to their Guardians as I would have liked, especially this being the third movie in the trilogy. It seems that whenever any adversary would come face to the Guardians, they would go through them like butter in some instances. There are also certain scenes where some members of the Guardians are stuck, but then some conveniences happen which make them unstuck. I'm purposely leaving that vague for you to find out when you watch the movie. Guys, overall, this movie was a great surprise. This is one of my favorite post-Endgame Marvel movies. I still think No Way Home is their best Phase 4 and 5 movie, but this is definitely in the top 3 for sure. I have to think of a list later on. I don't know if this movie is the MCU's savior, as some people were claiming in their reviews. At least what this movie tells me is that the MCU is still capable of producing bangers, and they should not be discounted just yet. Guys, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is better than Guardians 2, but I still will give the edge to the first Guardians, as I still think it's the funniest Marvel movie, and it was a surprise that came out of nowhere back in 2014. That movie is so well made, and it is just a breath of fresh air. But this movie comes close to the first one, and I will give this movie a 9 out of 10. That's it for my review, guys. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time for my review of Fast X.